So I'll give you the brief story. It's actually, yeah, I think you may know this, but my dad was an army chaplain, and before he was an army chaplain, he was. We were missionaries to Puerto Rico, and sometimes people will ask me, "Is like, did you want to be a entrepreneur? Like, was that something that you aspired to?" And I was like, "Not really. I mean, my dad's a preacher, my mom's a teacher. Like
Yeah.
that's just not how we grew up." But when I look back on my dad's first church, which was in Puerto Rico, Freedom Chapel,
Mhm.
name of it. When we first got there, he had to get a building, so he found a hotel that was a bar on Saturday night, and it was a church on Sunday, right? So the dance floor became the church floor. And I was probably like 6 or 7. My little sister was around 3, and my dad would have this guy set up the room with 50 chairs, and for like 3 months, like he just preached fire to just my sister and my mom and me. And every Sunday he'd show up ready to go. We'd set up the church and nobody showed up. And it was a really trying time for my dad, witnessing your dad kind of cry on the way home. For him, this was about ministry and God's calling in his life and all this stuff. And it's like, hey,
Right.
am I in the right place?
Right.
About halfway in, this guy says, hey, I'm tired of setting up these 50 chairs. I see it's just you and the kids in the front. He said, I'm going to put out 25 chairs for you. And my dad just lost it on this guy. He's like, absolutely not. Like, it's got to be 50 chairs. And the guy didn't really understand it because, he's looking at it and he's not seeing what my dad's seeing, but he insisted and he won that argument. And the guy put out 50 chairs. And, you fast forward 6 months, first family shows up, fast forward a year, all 50 chairs are full, and we had to move out of that hotel
That's
uh,
amazing. What a
bar.
story. Yeah. That's awesome.
But those early days, there were a lot of lessons I took out of that, which is, a lot of times startups are like that. You put it out there into the world, you have this vision, what, people are going to show up to. And from the outside in the early days, you look
Mm.
crazy. You look like, nobody's showing up to your, to your party.
Yeah.
And so how do you kind of work through that, both from, kind of the mental toughness that it takes to get there and then see that through to the other side? I feel like the best founders, you have to have that conviction to say, no, you're not taking my 25 chairs. It's 50. Uh, so that's kind of the origins of
Love that
of
story.
50 chairs.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like well, one, we know that visualization is really important for athletes. And so psychologically, the 50 chairs, mattered. Sounds like the guy who's physically responsible for unfolding them was like, dude, but to your dad, he's like, I've got a vision here. And honestly, that's what it's like to motivate startup employees who might not understand. But if the first problem is an acquisition problem, you've got to solve that one to just see if people like the product, right? So until you got that first family was unclear because he just never had a chance to share his product with somebody. But it sounds like the product was pretty good if it went through that much growth in the first 12 months.
Yeah, they did amazing stuff. And I know that, you and I think we started building about the same time in DC. And I've watched you as a founder and as a startup and ID me from like, hey, this is a startup company to this is infrastructure that people are depending on.
Yeah.
And so walk me through a moment just in your own journey where like that light bulb goes off. I'm like, hey, I'm not a startup anymore. People are relying on ID Me and the service we provide for, what they do. Was there a moment that it just kinda hit you?
I think I actually realized what it could be about 18 months in. There have been additional surprises along the way. For instance, I had no idea how significant of a problem fraud is in this country and social engineering and scams. I thought that was something that happened on the periphery. And it turns out, I think it's far more normative in social media and in life than people know about just because its effects are so dispersed and victims have so much shame about speaking up publicly. Like nobody wants to look incompetent and share their story with the world after they've been tricked by somebody they met online. So that part has been new, but I'm in American history and economics major from Vanderbilt, and I love patterns and how markets develop. And those patterns are consistent and thematic if you study economic development over time, including the one that we're in right now. And if you can read the macro trends right, you can you can sort of figure out like where there will be a need in the market that you can fill through infrastructure, the same way that Carnegie and Rockefeller and JP Morgan and all these guys in the original industrial revolution found a way to really service, a new economy. So for me, when I saw that people hate managing passwords. There's a ton of friction in re-entering data in forms or reproving who you are across websites. And if you see this trend of the economy digitizing only accelerating into the future, you could just look at, okay, the average American manages 150 logins. Now they manage 300. Now they manage 500. Soon it'll be more than that. And they'll have agents to manage as well. And I just didn't think that was sustainable in a paradigm where every single app tried to solve authentication itself in a silo. This is kind of what the world looked like before Visa, where every merchant would try to handle payments themselves and credit and underwriting. And of course, it's very high friction and people don't have tokens they can bring with them across merchants. And underwriting is hard because you get scammed a lot if you're a merchant. You don't have as much data as the banks and the networks. And so once you kind of view markets that way, you can kind of see where the wind is blowing, if you will.
Mm.
And then the only question is, well, how do you enter this market and how do you solve problems in a specific group of people's life in order to get into that current? And so there's been a ton of learning from that sense, but I think the first order thing is just like reading the tea leaves, if you will. And
Mm.
I'm really grateful to all my professors at Vanderbilt because if they hadn't taught me, I wouldn't have been able to kind of think about the world that way.
Amazing, man. Yeah, I've seen I've seen that happen. I've experienced that. I would say like it's very interesting when you go to fill out your taxes and I get a thing from the IRS saying, "Hey, use ID me to
Yeah,
to
yeah,
verify yourself."
it's surreal for me too, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, there's gotta be I would imagine a little bit of a weight to that for you and as the company, it's like, "Hey, we're not just allowing." I mean, and we'll share, I'd like to share some of that origin story of ID.me, but we're not just allowing people to go online and get, 20% off from Nike and prove that they're a veteran, but they are getting their benefits and their services and, is that is it's at some point in that evolution of ID.me, infrastructure became the primary thing that people will probably know ID.me for, right? Is there a weight to that you carry as a founder?
Yeah, absolutely. In cyberspace, we're the first thing that's between China and North Korea and Iran and the United States Department of the Treasury. And certainly there are layered systems there and firewalls and all that good stuff. But generally, we are, the first primary line of defense to authenticate that you're you. And these nation states and organized criminal groups are attacking everyday Americans. So, helping people has always been at the core of my DNA. I love to serve, whether that's helping military families, save money when they're going out and shopping and making sure that they're honored for their service without putting their personal data at risk, to protecting the American government itself. So, that responsibility from carrying the lives of the 32 scouts and snipers I led in combat all the way through to today, where most of the federal government uses ID.me to establish trust when dispersing. I mean, just one program at HHS, Payment Management Services, disperses over $900 billion a year. It's an extraordinary responsibility and one that I take very seriously. The team takes very seriously because we want to make sure that we create a world where your data is your own. Your data is safe. All these government agencies, credit bureaus, they've all been breached so many times, and that you decide, how it's used. And we think that in a world where you control your identity and your login moves with you to take friction out of your life, that's a better world than having data brokers and all these entities that are selling it or sharing it without your consent. It's also a world where there's far less fraud and people get time back. So it is very stressful, but it's also a future that's worth fighting for. And I think I speak for everyone at ID.me when I know that we share that same purpose and cause. But as you know, leadership is always lonely at the top. It comes with the territory. But man, I love leading people and I love leading teams against missions that matter.
And you just had a history of that, and I wanna get into that a little bit, but, when you were growing up, what did what did success look like for you? Like, what did you think that that was going to be, based on kinda where you grew up and your family history and, like, what did success look like?
Well, from just like a little kid perspective, my dream was to be a professional soccer player. So that was always like, the little kid thing. But I also grew up in a family of heroes. My grandfather was a hero in World War II, crawled out in front of 3 German machine gun nests to save his battalion from a Nazi counterattack. So that the forward observer's line who'd been cut, he spliced it, which is why he was out there and they were able to call in artillery and to beat back that assault. So honestly, like when I would daydream and stuff, I would dream about having the opportunity to be a hero, like, a
Yeah.
plane getting hijacked or something or whatever, and then, like saving the day. And that's what I would think about at night before I went to sleep, was just moments where people really needed help, that I would be the one to play a part in saving them. And I probably thought about that more than anything else during my childhood.
Wow. Was that kind of inner desire to go help, was that partly, I'm hearing through like your grandfather's story, just kind of like, and I grew up in a military family. I feel like that's just, you see that every day. You hear those kind of stories, they became kind of normal in your life. But then you moved into going to school and then eventually serving. Was that always the plan?
No. So despite, whether it's planes or, pushing people out of the way of cars and like taking one for the team, I think there's just something noble about a society where people look out for each other and people are willing to sacrifice for each other. I think reading about the stories of not just family, but just Omaha Beach and Okinawa and everything that we just celebrated coming out of Memorial Day. There's just something incredible about a country and a society where people are willing to sacrifice again for a republic and a way of life that is very rare in the history of mankind. So, but as far as like serving itself, I did not want to be a career soldier. I did it because I felt like I needed to serve to give back to the country. It helped pay for Vanderbilt, but it was not my long-term plan. It was just something I felt like I needed to do to earn my citizenship, to be honest.
Mm.
And it just so happened that, my sophomore year at Vanderbilt, 9/11, I realized that when I commissioned as an officer, I was going to lead men in war. And, so I figured might as well, invest all of my time getting ready for that.
Mm. Yeah. And did you deploy right after commission?
Not right after. So I commissioned from Vanderbilt in 2004. I had already done airborne school, so I had done the paratrooper qualifications, and then went down to Fort Benning, Georgia, did the infantry officer basic course, rolled right into Ranger School in January of '05. It was very cold. My dad knew the former commander of Delta Force, and he said, "Do you have any advice for my son before he goes to Ranger School?" And he goes, "Just tell him not to go in the wintertime." So when I looked at January 10th, I was like, "Come on." It was cold, like breaking ice on the water before we did the zip line stuff. It was freezing. So I'm proud of making it through that. And then I had a rifle platoon at Fort Lewis, Washington. I had them for 5 months, earned my expert infantryman badge right as soon as I showed up at the unit. So it was right into all that stuff coming straight out of Ranger School. Battalion commander made me the recon platoon leader. And then we deployed to Iraq from June of '06 to September 7. So 15 months right at the height of combat in the Civil War over there.
Wow. And Blake, what was, my dad, just sidebar, is going to jump in Normandy.
Amazing.
He's doing that. He's 72 years old, jumping out of a plane. But part of that for him was kind of going to honor those veterans and to go see that. He was part of the 101st Airborne, and so he really wanted to be on that beach on that day. But as you kind of look back on service, what were those lessons you learned in service that you carry with you? And I'll just say to the audience, Blake wrote an article. If you haven't read it, you should definitely read it, about kind of honoring some of his colleagues, in Ranger School and while he was deployed. But what were some of those things that you learned through that you have carried forward?
Well, I'll start even with the Normandy thing because Dick Winters, when my dad was at Carlisle setting up the Army's History Institute out there in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, the actual Dick Winters from Easy Company and the 101st Airborne and Band of Brothers would come in every weekend to do research and kind of his reading and his writing. So it was very cool to have the actual kind of protagonist from that story there. And then Matt Eversman, who Josh Hartnett played in Block Hawk Down, was there as well. So Matt, after that movie came out, would speak at churches, and there was a mom with her, 6 or 7 year old daughter, and they were coming up afterwards, and the daughter's just bawling, and Josh or Matt rather is like, "What's wrong?" And the mom goes, "Well, she was expecting Josh Hartnett." And Matt, I love Matt, and he would say this too, but Matt looks more like Shrek than Josh Hartnett. So he said, "I would cry too if I was expecting Josh Hartnett." So funny. But look, I think anyone who raises their hand to serve and is willing to sacrifice is literally risking everything for our society and our way of life. And we honor that. It's a crapshoot, roulette spin, whatever analogy you want to use for those who have to pay the full and ultimate price and lay it on the altar of freedom. So we honor that, but could it as easily have been me or any one of my men? So I think, of course, yesterday was about honoring the fallen and remembering those who have given that sacrifice so that their memories live on and that we take some time to reflect on what that means for us as a country. It's amazing to serve with people whose character and drive and purpose is about selflessness at the root. So, in that sense, the military really changed me. And I think it's important. It's important for the country to have that type of service. We are happier when we serve other people. It is hardwired into us, even though it is the opposite of how we act transactionally. And I think going into environments where you are forced into a job that is predicated on service for several years can
Mhm.
indelibly shape you and make you into a better person, a better leader. So I knew that growing up. And that's why I wanted to do it for at least, 4 years to give back because I felt like you got your whole life to be focused on yourself as an individual. Take a few years up front to do something that's bigger than you. And honestly, that choice has given me so much more over the course of my life than I feel like, I put into it. So I just think it'd be good for the country if we just had more service and more programs that mixed people across social classes and race and everything else and got people out of their bubbles.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Whether it's the military or serving through, your local church or whatever it is, there's just something about that. They say the greatest antidote to depression is go serve. It just does something to you. So
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, I truly believe that. So when you got out, I know you went to Harvard. Was that intentional on your part is to say, "Hey, look, once I'm out, I'm gonna go down this kinda Harvard lane." I know that equation is changing for a lot of people and what they think is that next step, but what was going through your head when you were getting ready to get out and then transition into what was next for Blake?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to Nashville and Vanderbilt, which is bougie enough. It was my battalion commander who said, "Hey, insert colorful word there," and said, "You're going to apply to Harvard, or I'm not going to write you a letter of recommendation." So he changed the course of my life several times. Barry Huggins is like my second dad, and if not for him, I wouldn't have ended up at Harvard Business School at all. But once I was there, and once I think more importantly, he made me feel like I belonged there. That's also something I take with me as a leader that sometimes you have people who are just great that work for you and don't necessarily know how good they are to give them that belief and confidence that like, no, you got it and like let it rip. But everyone who's there, I mean, it's not the stereotype that you would think it is. There's a lot of humility where I think, but for a handful of students, everyone is really deeply humbled that they even have a spot in that class because of what you think about what it takes to get into a place like that. And so it was a really special 2 years coming out of the military. I didn't know what I wanted to do at that time. I didn't have any plan. But the thing about volunteering and serving that you just talked about is that you could tell people you're useful, you have purpose, and when you can clearly help somebody and get instant gratification from that, it creates a really positive feedback loop. So I knew that I was looking for something, but maybe just like when your dad was setting up his church, you have an idea of what you want to do and a notion of the impact you want to make. You just don't know how that's going to physically manifest in the world and how long it's going to take. And that's the journey from, the first step to walking the path today that you just figure out day by day.
Yeah. So you did this idea. I know that if I remember correctly, the idea sparked while you were at school. Now, was this a function of like, hey, I had a project that I had to do, and this was the thing I chose to do, or was this kind of percolating in your head?
I knew I didn't want to go into corporate America. I just had I knew, and from a summer internship I did with a management consulting firm, I just knew it wasn't for me. I loved what I had in the military, which was a team, and I had a ton of autonomy, and I could just go pursue a mission that was important that I felt like I was uniquely equipped or very competent at solving. And so those were kind of my conditions. I had no idea what that would look like in the world. And I was also taking, random electives my second year when I was able to do that. I was in a writing group down at Emerson College in Boston just to learn how to develop my craft in
Mm,
that way and to further myself as a storyteller because I felt like I had a lot to share, but didn't necessarily have the tool to communicate what I felt inside of me. And
mm.
so there was just, I mean, yeah, 450 combat patrols is a lot. And, and a bunch of my friends were killed. So it was just a moment of, I guess, personal turmoil in my life as I was just trying to sort through all of that and figure out what my place in the world would be.
So this, as the story goes, I think you were somewhere recently. Um, you talk about the blooming onion.
Yeah.
Would you mind kind of filling in the audience on kind of that origin of, "Hey, this is," and I think a lot of entrepreneurs go through this. There's a moment, whether it's a progression or like an instant where you see something and you're like, "That's not right. Like, it shouldn't be that way. And is anybody doing anything about this? Because I'm seeing the world, but this doesn't seem to bother anybody that it works this way." So let's talk about that for a second. Maybe use the blooming onion as the catalyst for the story, but
Yeah, I think so. The Blooming Onion story, every Veterans Day is there's all sorts of freebies and appetizers, around the country. A lot of stores will say you can bring in your DD 214, which is your separation paperwork, because most veterans don't have an ID card. More do now that they've issued this ID card you can get from the VA. But which I encourage people to do. The Veterans Identification Card and the Veterans Health Identification Card, both at VA.gov, are important parts of solving, the problem that I'm about to describe. But on this document is your name, your date of birth, the address when you entered the military, your social security number. And there was this incentive for individuals to share their social security number to get, in this case, when I looked at the Outback and saw veterans, getting free blooming onions, they were showing their social security number to strangers to get a fried vegetable. And I thought that was not a smart trade. And so zooming in on that behavior and then zooming out to the FTC data shows that veterans are about 80% more likely to suffer from identity theft. This is where I was like, okay, 83% higher rates of identity theft than the typical American. No wonder our socials on all these forms. And then we have all these perverse incentives to share it with people, including when we want free vegetables. And then you go over and you look at, well, there's all this benefit and goodwill, but stolen valor is a huge problem where the reason these companies wouldn't offer these benefits online, where it'd be really easy for military families to access them, was because they were concerned they couldn't keep those programs safe from fraud. So when you trace the through line through identity becomes the way to solve that issue. Did this person actually serve, or are they lying about their service? And then if
mm,
that person did serve, is this user actually that person? That two step is the root of trust. It's easy to know something about someone or that's true in the world. It's much more difficult to prove that you're that person if challenged. And so I figured out, okay, well, if that's the way to solve it, would you want to put the burden on the individual to prove their identity at every single app they go to, like password problem on steroids? Or would it make more sense to build a digital wallet that functions more like PayPal or, Facebook Connect or Google, where you do it once and then your data is moving with you? And so clearly as an individual, I'm like the PayPal, Venmo, Apple Pay model makes a lot more sense. And so that was the through line, but it starts with observing behavior that anyone would look at and be like, that's ridiculous if you really think about it. But no one had thought to take a run at it and actually solve it. And it's a hard problem to solve. I can attest. So I figured that problem matters, and I can help people
mm.
there and help companies there. And I formed a team that believed the same thing. There were a lot of learnings and pivots along the way, but that's part of it. You just figure out what's the real problem here, and if is what I'm doing actually getting at it, or is the actual root cause sort of tangential to what I'm doing. So wasn't a perfect straight up and to the right. I would never want to give your audience that impression, but once you're on your way,
Yeah.
good teams figure it out.
So let's talk about that a little bit because team building is, sometimes it's two people in a room starting out and you have to add more to your team. What when you thought about those early days, was it, hey, I need to build a team around Blake in my blind spots, or is it, hey, I need a marketing person, let me go hire a marketing person? What was the kind of your mental frame on, like, hey, here's what we need to be successful at this?
My first hire was a head of product, and then technical hires were the next ones. I think when it comes, there's all these like successful founder CEO archetypes. Mark Benioff is a marketing CEO. Honestly, Steve Jobs might be the best marketer of all time as a founder CEO. Kalanick operations, Chesky at Airbnb design and product, and then of course Zuckerberg, and there's a whole slew of technical founders, Max Levchin, who are just exceptional technologists. I am much more of an operations CEO, which means I'm highly effective at go to market too, because that's how I communicate the value that IDME is bringing into the world. I will go in, I'll decompose what's happening at the Outback and the social and the server, and I'll show that to executives and be like, is that the intent of this program, which is designed to help military, is that it actually results in them sharing their most sensitive data to strangers? And I think everyone would go, no.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Now that we're there,
Yeah.
here's a better way. There's two alternatives. Here's how you could solve it yourself, but put all the burden on the veteran, or here's how we could solve it through a network that looks a lot like banking, where we take that sensitive data that we started this conversation with me feeling stressed about protecting. But the benefit of that, just like with Chase or Citibank or Bank of America, is that when they take your sensitive data to enroll you and to make sure Gary's Gary, but when you're paying for something, the merchant doesn't get your social security number. They just get like authorization and trust that, they're going to get money in exchange for whatever goods or services you're buying. And so I said, look, this model is proven for payments. We're just going to port it over here to identity, whether that's your legal identity that you're you, or it's your work identity that you're military, or now a teacher or student, or a truck driver, and so on. And as long as the individual is in control of it and they never have to reprove, what's true about their identity twice or three times, because it's moving with the login and the wallet now, that would be a better world. And so that is kind of how my core competence translated into a clear articulation of the value that our product brings to the world. The wallet really is, as infrastructure, is an operations product. It takes very inefficient siloed workflows and it makes it a lot more efficient and safe and privacy enhancing across the network. And I watched General Stan McChrystal do this in Iraq, where he inverted the hierarchical command and control of the military and all its silos with CIA and Delta and all these. He said, nope, we're going to have one clearinghouse that shares information. You're going to share that information right out to the edge because the war is being fought at the platoon and the company and squad level. And so we're not going to filter it through all these chains or like keep information from each other. We're going to share it and then get it out to the edge. So that's me. Now, I'm a voracious learner. I'm always looking to upgrade my capability in terms of being a better technologist and learning about storytelling. And I don't know if I'll ever be what some would call an amazing designer, but I really respect uh, our design team and how talented they are. It's a different level of craftsmanship. So I'm very aware of where I have superpowers that I think anyone in the company would be like, yeah, if you put like breaking down an ops flow and showing before and
Yeah.
after and then communicating out and then turning that into a business model, Blake's got
Which
it. I think you actually want me to go to finer details of like building an API or anything else. I mean, I know how they work, and like I could build something serviceable for sure, but it wouldn't be at the same level of of craft as our senior engineers and some of these brilliant folks who have been doing that for a long time. So I think just knowing where you're most useful to the team and knowing where you need help. I built the product management and technology functions around me and controlled ops and go to market as my unique sources of differentiation that I felt like I wanted to stay in those lanes and spend my most time there.
So as you've kind of grown the company and its capabilities, has that role? And we talked a little bit about this when we were at Moonshot's AGM. Is you kind of got to be the CEO for that moment in the company that the company's at, right? And so that changes a little bit over time.
Yes.
Where were those inflection points for you? Like, how did you know, hey, the company needs a different version of Blake that maybe it needed when it first started out?
Yeah, well, look, I think a lot of these challenges just happen with scale where things that you can, viscerally and physically touch. And if you just work harder, you can keep up with things. As you scale, these things go away. You become a real company. And so now this becomes, well, can you lead well through others? Can you establish rhythms and processes that allow you to manage effectively? And so in modern times, all of the most effective CEOs, they're all quants. They all think about the world through data. They use anecdote too, don't get me wrong. If you listen to Bezos and everything else talk about like the customer's always right. And if you're getting reports that say one thing, but the customer another, the customer's almost always right if you actually dig it out because the data is probably missing something. So they have both left and right brain, but they're all quants. And so the hardest part is that as you scale, you need to figure out my frame is people, system, process. If you have the right people will build the right system. And if you have the right people and system, the thing that then gels around that is a process. The tough thing is if you ever do go through hypergrowth, where I think something like through 2018 or 2019 through 2021 or 2022, I'll get it wrong, but we went through like 600% plus growth. And so all three break. Your people are way out over their skis. The system is not designed for 600% plus growth in such a short period of time. And of course, like all your rituals, it just becomes chaos inside the company. So a lot of reinventing yourself is about just taking stock of, all right, my 50 million, by market cap company is now worth a couple billion. And so being a VP of a $50 million company versus a $2 billion company is just a totally different job. And do I have the right people who are capable at this level of complexity and scale that I would personally want to work for? And so that can be the hardest thing because everything starts with people. And then after you get the people part right, you got to get the system right to make sure that it's designed for scale. And then you build these like operational rituals of, well, how can I review work in such a way that keeps me in touch with the progress the team's making? So I'm not sitting back. Frank Slootman said the mistake that most young executives make is they hire people who look great on paper, they delegate to them, and they sit back and they wait for greatness. That's not how any of the best companies are run. If you from Revolut to Steve Jobs to Bill Gates, you name it. Steve Jobs spent most of his time reviewing work. Johnny, and the whole theme of like experts leading experts. If you create weekly rituals where you can review your team's work and progress and operate the company on a weekly cadence, and you have the most frequent check-ins with the teams that are working on the most important projects, and maybe more hands off and monthly or quarterly or bi-quarterly meetings with less important projects in the company. That's the hard part because and then the market's changing around you and AI and the capital markets might be, collapsing more often than not, although we're back now. So it is just really hard. You have to be unbelievably flexible and adaptable through all of that. Sometimes it's overwhelming. So unless you just love constant chaos and figuring out like, here's another super tough, gnarly problem that's going to take you, several months to solve, then you don't want to be a CEO of a hyper growth company.
It sounds like you have, like, over the course of your career, in the midst of all of that, kind of the change in company, you've had, you've mentioned Stan McChrystal, and I know that Kelly's been a great mentor to you. How important was that going through kind of having, you've got your day-to-day operators, but then having your counsel to lean on and get advice through those, tough periods of time?
Yeah. Well, Kelly changed my life. Kelly Purdue was my mentor coming out of Harvard Business School and just got me through some really rough, low moments personally. And also just was a super helpful mentor in terms of the business and getting going and, raising capital and all these other things that take up a lot of your time and are really super difficult in the first 2 years of starting a company. So David Tish, who was the first check into ID.me, introduced me to Kelly. And given our background, both as Army vets, he was just extraordinarily important in my life. And is still incredibly important in my life, although, in a different way now, where he's helping me navigate more of the transition of, identity and the importance of trust, and as a identity as a trust and context utility to the AI world.
Mm,
But you end up building a bench. I think a big part of life is knowing who to listen to when.
mm,
And once you understand what someone's superpower is and if they're exceptional at that thing, then you have experts you can call on who can help you when you're confronted with a problem that falls into their domain. So Mark McLaughlin, who is the CEO of VeriSign and Palo Alto Networks on the board of Snowflake, it was an early investor and advisor. And if I ever have any questions about org design or public markets or how to put together, the board and just problems I'm facing generally, Mark is amazing for
mm.
some of those, questions. If I have questions about, technology and trends, and where things are going, the team at Ribbit are some of the smartest investors I've ever met in my life. And also David Tish, Box Group, and Adam Rothenberg, who over there also, as some of the most successful seed investors of all time, have a really good lens on what are the next areas that are really going to matter and why. And so I can think about that through the lens of what's important to my business and in terms of taking those new technologies and leveraging them. And I could go on, but thematically, there's kind of like the mentors and people that you have in your corner that always just have your back and believe in the mission no matter what. Kelly Purdue is that for me. But there's a lot of other people who also are invested. They're almost like employees, except they don't work for the company, and they just want to help, which I'm so grateful for every day. I think it is unique to America's culture that we have this selflessness and pay it forward attitude, and because I've been so impacted,
Mm.
whenever I can, for entrepreneurs who I think really have something special inside of them, I try to give as much back as I can. I will do more later, but right now I'm still in the middle of like my own fight, but it's been really special.
Yeah, Blake, and I can say to the audience listening, every time I get some time with Blake, even the fact that he's coming on this podcast, he's always super helpful. If it's something technical to, hey, I don't know what to do in terms of like something I'm going through as a CEO. So I can say that that's not just words on a screen. Blake lives that. Blake, as you have transitioned, I feel like there's a point where you've got you're like a startup founder, and then you become this celebrity CEO. And I, and I've seen you start to there's a group of people. I saw the Army Navy game with Elon Musk, and your company has reached a level where you're hyperscaling, like you said, and there's a group of colleagues around you now that are different than when you started. What has that transition been like for you? Just on a personal note, to kind of be in those rooms, to be part of those conversations, and really seeing around the corner at a different level.
First, just what an honor when you're around people that are at the top of their field in different ways, and to get a chance to talk to them and converse. I think it's really interesting because most of these people in their life, they're just surrounded by people who want something from them. And so to be with, I wouldn't call myself a peer to Elon. I don't know that he does have a peer in terms of, his ability as an entrepreneur and innovator and engineer. But to be able to spend time with people where there's no agenda and just to pick their brain about what makes them tick in terms of purpose, how they think about motivating teams, leading them, recruiting talent. Thematically, from talking to Eric Glyman at Ramp and Lou at Duolingo and Ryan Peterson at Flexport and John Collison at Stripe, and on and on and on. You can pick up so many themes that cut across success that when you pull back, you're like, wow, that's a really interesting approach. Some of which I might already be doing, but some of which might be new. And I was struck to the extent by which, Eric and Ryan, and also, for Elon's companies as well, they hire young people who are brilliant and they give them an extraordinary level of responsibility. Ryan's Peterson's quote is he likes to remind people that Isaac Newton invented calculus when he was 22 years old. So So I think,
Yeah.
and then as you continue through, like you'll listen, Peter Thiel will talk extensively about by the time someone's 30, their sort of caliber is known. Therefore, the market, it's almost like athletes. The market will pay a ton of money for those people. And if you're a startup that doesn't have a lot of cash, but you've got the equity upside, it's very difficult to hire that talent. So how can you compete? Almost like small market sports teams, you have to succeed through the draft. And so the economics part of my brain when I hear this is like, oh, they're effectively buying the first round of the NFL draft. And
Mhm.
while there are some duds, there's also some, folks in there that are Peyton Manning,
Yep.
that are Jerry Rice, that are like whatever,
Yeah.
Lawrence Taylor. And to have someone like that work for years and years at your company and grow up within it, just look at PayPal itself.
Yeah.
Peter Thiel, Reid Hoffman, Elon Musk, Max Levchin, the founder of Yelp was there. I mean, you go on and on. Like clearly hiring brilliant young people and giving them a lot of responsibility is part of the alchemy of really successful founders that you can start to see as a theme. And it cuts across all the conventional wisdom that as you work in larger companies and people get risk averse, they hire,
Oh,
folks
yeah.
that have been there, done that, and all the best founders are like, yeah, if you really want talent arbitrage, hire for potential and capability and ambition and work ethic and just intellect, they'll figure it out. And I think founders themselves are proof that that's true
Mm.
when you look at the age of some founders and how successful they've been. So why wouldn't that be true at the team level for somebody
Mhm.
who's maybe not willing to take the sort of personal risk that a founder would, or is not willing to put in the cycles and fundraising and just stress, but is willing to like really go nuts building something that matters. So that's just an example that I would share. What an honor to be with these people who are creating what our future world looks like and delivering value that's validated by the market. And it's my life is surreal. And I'm so grateful that I get the opportunity to learn because I'm just insatiably curious. And I love picking the brains of some of the smartest people and most successful people who are out there.
Yeah. Well, you picked up on a couple things, and I know we're getting close to our time together, but the world is in this inflection point. I was just at Kathy Wood's ARK Invest Big
Cool.
Ideas
Yeah.
a conference, and they were showing the amount of investment in AI compared to the railroads, and as an economics major, kind of seeing how much compared to like these big inflection points, and it's through the roof. I mean, literally like exponential growth, and then you've got data centers and terrestrial, both terrestrial and space data centers, and that's kind of reaching that hockey stick growth. I mean, amazing, amazing time to be alive. But on the other side of that, you have young people who have, of the unemployment that's rising, theirs is rising the fastest at 9% because a lot of that disruption is happening for that group. And so the question about identity and I think has surfaced like this idea of purpose and who am I and how do I prove that? And with generative AI, how does someone know that you are who you say you are? And I think this problem is only going to get worse over time. So can you talk to the audience about like, hey, from your standpoint, I mean, these are all great things, right? It feels like an exciting time to be alive, but there's this other side of it. It's like, how do we know, what does it mean to be a human? How does identity come into that picture? How are you guys thinking about this?
Yeah, well, I think at a high level, there's always a regression to the mean against whatever trend is happening. And so as the world is becoming increasingly artificial, it's never been more important to know what's real. And I think that's true online where we provide this trust utility to make sure that you're you and that somebody with a deep fake of, your face that's trying to pretend to be you can't get into your government benefits or your healthcare records, or if you get a phone call from, and it's your child's voice and, they're screaming and they've said they've been kidnapped and someone wants you to wire money, that we can be caller ID for real and be like, you're good. That's not
Mm.
coming from the United States or anywhere even close to where you're at right now. Your kids at school, you're fine. So, that's our role in our domain. But I honestly think that, as there will be even more wealth created out of technology and out of AI and everything else, there's already been this human craving for real personal experiences, whether those are live events or travel. And so, inevitably, as productivity goes up and labor and capital stay constant, that's where real wealth comes from. And that's what's happening systematically. We will decide as a society how we want to distribute that wealth. Again, back to government benefits. If we decide that we want to do it through taxes, I can tell you the level of fraud right now is gross and has to come down. So again, identity becomes really critical to the extent that we go, yeah, there's so much wealth that we already have a progressive system where I think the top like 1 or 2% of earners pay the majority of taxes in this country. So how do we make sure that those transfer payments actually get to the folks they're intended to get to and don't go to organized crime, to nation states that are adversaries that would fund their military and weapons programs against us. And that's why I'm a national security, just wrapped up my national security fellowship at Vanderbilt, was because of the role that we play in that domain. So I am an optimist. And again, if the world is getting better and if wealth is increasing, America's success is because we're willing to tolerate structural and geographic dislocations that other countries aren't, whether
Right.
that's Detroit and then the move to Silicon Valley, whether that's the Pony Express getting disrupted by the automobile, different industries have faced this over time. In the last industrial revolution, over 90% of the jobs were in farming. And I'm sure if you took a farmer and you put him in the middle of San Francisco or New York City or Los Angeles, they'd be like, what am I looking at? Like, yeah, man, the nature of work has gotten a
Mhm.
lot different. But I highly doubt you would take somebody, sipping a latte out of one of these corporate buildings and be like, would you like to go pull some ox and plow your field?
Yeah.
Hell no, right? So
Yeah.
I think the same thing will be true 100 years from now. People will be like, "Wait, you wrote code by hand? You you know,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
did PowerPoints instead of just like talking to your computer and telling it visually like what you had to copy paste stuff, like you couldn't just work with your agent to like have it design as like this Apple quality design. What a better world that will be. So I just at every time there's always these doomers who are afraid of change, and I know change is scary, but whenever you're creating wealth and making society better, you can always figure out how folks are going to share in that. And so I'm an eternal optimist in that. And I think all the naysayers, as long as we make sure that we help soften the impact of some of these changes and that we give people a hand as they're trying to reskill themselves and to adapt, that's the main thing. And that could be tough if unemployment skyrockets, if there are large layoffs as these models get more powerful. But I think provided we navigate that on like a 1 to 2 year horizon, the future 3+ years out just gets brighter and brighter.
I agree, man. I agree. I am also an AI optimist, but I do hear these threads of just kind of people feeling uncertain in these moments, which I think is, you know, natural to kind of feel
Natural.
that way. But if you look at all the things, at least the models that I've seen, particularly in Kathy Wood's world of what the future could look like, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. I think they were estimating 7.5% GDP growth. I mean, what a wonderful world. We're not there yet. That's their 5-year horizon, but we're on the cusp of some of those things. So
I think that's right. Yeah, it's AI plus robotics where things get really crazy, but just all the rote work that goes into even all the blue collar jobs where you got to do schematics and designs and things, and the fact that tasks that would take hours, if not days, can come down to minutes with skills is amazing. I think again back to the unit economics when you look at the impact that this is having on people's lives, and then you go, this is every job across the economy that has a consistent process in terms of executing a job where all the rote stuff of just knowing what you want to do and then translating that down, that's going to get so much easier. Now, you have a lot more thinking becomes the bottleneck of like, how do you want to architect it? What's the right problem to solve? So Steve Yigi, who's a developer I follow, wrote this blog post where he's so cognitively exhausted by the power of these models that he just like falls asleep as his workstation and wakes back up, and I think we're all going through that right now. But that type of work is so much more rewarding than doing the manual nug work of figuring out how to manipulate Excel or PowerPoint or who wants to do that. So the fact that that's going away in life is an incredible thing.
yeah, I agree. I think the world, we're coming up on our 250th anniversary. of the United States. And we are a nation of builders. And I think that there's never been a better time to be a builder really than right now. The barrier to entry to start a company is incredibly low. So like I'll end with one last question for you. It's, I have a lot of students that I work with at universities and people that are, a lot of the audience that's listening to this is, maybe they're in their corporate job, but they want to leave. They don't feel like they fit in. And it's like for them, what is the best thing they could do if you were looking back at Blake in that early period where you hadn't started ID Me yet, but you could give some advice to that person? What would you tell them to do?
The biggest thing is to develop a skill that matters, that's differentiated, and that's tied to your superpower. So I would consider myself a generalist. If you look at my profile, I was magna cum laude coming out of Vanderbilt. I had soft major history. I had a more technical major in economics, but I developed a tool set that was horizontal that helped me analyze problems and really think about them. And then in an applied sense, because of the time I spent with the National Security Agency guys, I developed a deep competence in identity, and my natural superpower is operations. So that's the triangle of what made me able to do what I do now as a general manager. I think you will also find folks who might not be more the Renaissance man archetype, but are specialists. My older brother is a great example of this. He's a brilliant engineer, did the 5G switches and everything else for Ericsson, for Verizon, and everything else. My parents were hard on him, but I was like, no, no, no. He's so much smarter than me in this domain. Like, you don't understand. He's brilliant. And, the thing about being brilliant in a domain, Michael Jordan should have never played baseball. He's an amazing basketball player. And if you're amazing soccer, basketball, tennis. Like no one cares about how good Roger Federer is at different sports. So the other track is if you just have this like deep domain expertise, you're not the Renaissance man or woman, but you are just incredible in this one field, then maybe that's where with your one life you can make an amazing contribution at whatever scale you aspire to do that. So I think it's just incredibly rewarding to change the world and to make it better and to have autonomy. That's not for everybody, but as an entrepreneur, that's for me. And I think if you aspire to be more of a general manager, then you better work really hard to turn your latent intellect into skill. And that's why I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, GPA doesn't matter." It matters to me. There's a through line in my life of working really hard from my degree from Vanderbilt all the way through the military to Harvard Business School. We are what we do. Those habits. Now, you can form great habits at any moment in your life. What needs to be clear to somebody looking at it though is that wow, there was an inflection point where you went from like coasting to like someone lit a fire under your ass and you really went for it. And you can see it change and you can see the excellence develop. If you haven't developed habits of excellence in your life and you expect to flip the switch when you go into your own endeavor, that will not happen.
Mm.
That will not happen. It was extraordinarily difficult for me to succeed in this field despite having a really strong track record behind me. So that's it. But if you're willing, I think Colt McCoy said it right. A lot of people have uphill aspirations but downhill expectations for work. If you have uphill aspirations and you are willing to suffer and have the grit and tenacity to go through all the obstacles that you will encounter as you are scrambling over the rocks and obstacles to get uphill, you can achieve something extraordinary and great. But just like Ranger School, only if you have that DNA. But if you feel like you've got it, do it now while you're young, before you have a family and before you have all these obligations, because time is your most precious commodity and time goes away the more people depend on you and want things from you. So you got to do it early is the other part. If you're going to go, you got to go right now.
Yeah. Great advice, Blake. I just want to say personally, thank you for your leadership, mentorship over the years. It's been just one of the joys watching your rocket ship take off, and thank you for sharing with our audience today about kind of your 50 cheers moments. And excited to see what's next for ID Me and for you personally.
Thanks, Gary. I'm really proud of you.
Thank you, man. Thanks.